The following content is for information and entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed in this episode are those of the participants and do not represent the views of any third-party entities. Hello and welcome to Flexibility Focus Minisode number 3, a companion show to the main podcast in which I bring you interviews with the people doing great things in the health and fitness community. In this interview, I talk with Monty Simmons, a martial artist, movement coach, and personal trainer from London. I've wanted to speak with Monty for a while because he presents a very interesting style of movement and fitness that is equal parts holistic and cerebral, and this is something which is reflected in the brilliant answers he gives to my questions. In the minisode, Monty and I discuss martial arts, physical education, biomechanics, forming healthy habits, and much more. To find Monty on social media, his Instagram handle is @movewithmonty, and his website is www.movewithmonty.uk. Move with Monty is spelled MOVEWITHMONTY. Please show your support for the show by liking and subscribing wherever you're listening or watching from, and please help spread the word by sharing the podcast with your friends. Thank you, and enjoy. I guess we begin by asking you to tell the audience a bit about you and how you got involved in the fitness industry.
Yeah, so I've always been into sport. I played football as a kid. My parents took me to a couple of gymnastics lessons, played a bit of tennis. So, I've always been into sport. But then at the age of 13, I picked up karate, and I really seemed to get on with that. So that kind of set me on a bit of a kind of path with martial arts. And when I got to about 17, my instructor asked me to teach some of the kids' classes because the kids' instructor that they had at the time just kind of packed up and left overnight. So they had no instructor. So he kind of just threw it on me at the last minute, just asked if I could teach a class. So that actually went really well. I enjoyed it, and that was that's how I kind of fell into my first fitness job. Was just completely off the fly. But it turns out I enjoyed it. I was kind of thrown in the deep end. It was very much kind of sink or swim. But yeah, I enjoyed it, which is good. So that kind of got me started with the teaching, not necessarily within the fitness industry, but within some sort of movement capacity. But then as I kind of got more experience with that, the guy that was running the gym at the time asked if I wanted to start teaching some of the boot camp classes. And when I was about 17, I got into lifting weights and that sort of thing. So I was starting to get a bit familiar with kind of fitness and training to improve strength or improve flexibility or whatever it is. So I was kind of coming into my own kind of training with it. But at the age of 18, he asked me to start teaching some kind of boot camp classes. Now, I wasn't actually qualified at the time. I didn't even know that I had to be. But unfortunately, the school was kind of run by one guy, and he seemed to not have too much concern for rules. But just kind of seemed to let me. I knew nothing different. But anyway, I started to really enjoy it. And I wanted to start getting into one-to-one PT. So then started Googling, what do I need to do in order to get into one-to-one PT? I needed to do my personal training qualification, which was challenging because I didn't really pay much attention to kind of physical education theory in school. So I was very much kind of starting from scratch. But so I did that. So I started doing my level 3, or my level 2, then my level 3. And by that point, I'd kind of finished school. So didn't really know what I wanted to do at that point, but I was kind of teaching a few one-on-ones. I was still teaching the kind of fitness classes. So I decided that I wanted to open my own gym at some point. And at that point, it was very much kind of about teaching martial arts. But at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I didn't go to university, but I still wanted to, continue my education somewhat. So ended up going to college, studying sport and exercise science for a couple of years, and then kind of promptly moved up to London in about 2017 I think it was now. So I was kind of PTing and teaching fitness classes from the age of about 17 up until about maybe 19, 20.
Right.
And then it's only been for like the last 3 or 4 years that I've been in London and kind of doing my thing there. So, for a good chunk of that period, whilst I was kind of transitioning between kind of training people down in Kent and training up in London, I was very much kind of living out of my car, driving between what clients that I had. So I I was driving kind of between Maidstone, where I'm from,
Yeah.
up to London, all the way across to Surrey, and then just kind of driving all around the place and trying to squeeze my own training in for a good couple of years. So
Wow.
it was
Nomadic
an
lifestyle.
intense kind of, yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. But a very kind of rapid and very kind of quick entry into the fitness, and I was kind of thrown into it, but loved it, so stuck with it.
Brilliant. So you mentioned obviously you got started with karate, and I know from your profile you're involved in jiu-jitsu as well. How did you get involved in BJJ, and like where do you train, and what does your training consist of?
So, well, I started with karate when I was 13, and I was doing that for about a few months, and then one of my friends at school invited me to come down and try out one of his MMA classes. So I'd started in karate and thought that I was, kind of Bruce Lee, doing all of the kind of moves, and I thought I was going to be able to, kick 10 people's asses, back to back, fight 10 people at the same time, that sort of thing. But anyway, I went to MMA, and I got my ass absolutely handed to me.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a wake-up call. So I just got completely addicted to that. So I ended up training MMA for a good couple of years.
Right.
And I never really enjoyed the jiu-jitsu stuff. I always liked the kicks and the kind of punching or the striking stuff. And, you could pull off fancy kicks and all that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed being able to use my kind of natural speed and agility to be able to, make up for my lack of skill.
Yeah.
But I never actually really enjoyed the jiu-jitsu. But anyway, when I was kind of about 16, I started getting into doing a bit of Wing Chun after watching Ip Man, him again, kind of beating up 10 guys. So I think that was kind of my goal in my head, was to be able to beat up 10 guys. Turns out that that's not so easy.
Yeah.
I kind of got into doing Kung Fu for a bit. Did a bit of judo, a bit of boxing. Did boxing for 6 months. Again, that was another kind of wake-up call for me, because, we've done lots of light sparring, but then all of a sudden I was kind of in a boxing ring with a guy that had had a couple of fights, and he punched me in the liver a couple of times whilst, after getting in the ring for about a minute, and I was like, shit, this something I'm doing is not working.
Bit intense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of got my ass handed to me on a fair few occasions, which kind of shattered that dream of being able to beat up 10 people in a row. But after I was kind of doing boxing for a bit, I decided to get into doing a bit of jiu-jitsu, because I kind of got interested in it. I was watching, I think I watched Choke by Hicks and Gracie.
Okay, yeah.
Choke, I think it's Choke. It's a documentary about him and his fighting. And then I just really got interested in that. So I went over to a club in Strood called Combat Sports Academy, and they kind of trained me up until blue belt. And around that time, when I just passed my blue belt, I then was kind of doing a lot of work up in London. So then I've kind of continued my jiu-jitsu training up there. So I now train at RGA, the Roger Gracie Academy.
Yeah.
And that's always great fun. And I've managed to kind of get my purple belt there, done a few competitions here and there. And so, yeah, that's kind of my background in that. So I guess I kind of got into jiu-jitsu because, I did a lot of karate, I did a lot of Wing Chun, and it was, very light contact, if anything, but I wanted a bit more. I think my first jiu-jitsu lesson, I went, I think it must have been about 19. And I was doing a lot of weightlifting at the time, and there was this like kid who was like maybe 14, but maybe weighed like 40 kilos, and he absolutely just wrapped himself around me. It was like trying to catch a tornado. He choked me. He did some sort of flying guillotine on me, which is quite impressive. Armbarred me and just absolutely like ragged me to pieces. So it was my martial arts has been kind of a long journey of thinking that I'm going to be this amazing kind of Bruce Lee, Ip Man style kind of fighter, but then just kind of constantly getting, checked and kind of knocked down a peg or two, but then using that to kind of fuel me. So it's been interesting.
I think grappling does that for a lot of strikers. It's kind of a process of broken disillusionment. Because I haven't grappled much, again, because I prefer the striking. And jiu-jitsu on and off, but it started with judo about 2012, 2013, and I just won the world championships in full contact karate, which there's no groundwork. So I'm going into this judo. Say again?
that's tough going.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, it is. It can be, but if you're used to it for so long, it kind of becomes second nature. But it kind of gave me this false confidence of being able to apply that to any kind of system. So I went into this judo class with a female instructor called Sophie Cox, who happens to be a 2-time GB Olympian, you know, in judo. And I thought I'll be able to handle it myself. And she did a sort of Gary. She did, you know, all these different judo throws. And honestly, I thought I was paralyzed the day after. I just couldn't all of the DOMs, you know. So I think that's an experience a lot of strikers can attest to. But what's Roger Gracie like? Because he's he was a bit of a beast in the competition scene, wasn't he? Have you rolled much with him? Or?
I've only ever rolled with him once. You know, as you can imagine, there's quite a demand from him in the classes. But I've rolled with a few of their kind of instructors there, and it's really hard to describe. Actually, it's you know, I have no idea how good he is. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? I'm that far away from his skill level that I just have absolutely no comprehension for how good he actually is. Yeah. So then my only experience of that is just being like absolutely smothered and kind of just slowly toyed with.
Yeah, that's the analogy I've heard from a lot of people. Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's such a bizarre experience. Like, you know exactly what he's going for. You know exactly what submission he's going for. He knows that you know that.
Yeah.
And he does it anyway, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So it's deadly humbling.
Yeah.
Deadly humbling. I occasionally kind of get fired up and then get quickly put back in my place.
Yeah, checking the ego. Yeah.
Great.
So obviously what belt are you now? You purple belt?
Purple belt, yeah.
Purple, yeah. So I think when we generally speak in terms of like the grades that people have and how long they've been in grade, I think if you look at a purple belt, that's like a black belt in most of the styles. That's just my opinion, but I think it's one that quite a few listeners who are martial artists might agree with. And obviously martial artists, so black belts are considered to have quite a good level of body control and body awareness. Do you feel like your jiu-jitsu training has a lot of carryover to your general movement training?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it gives you, I mean, at least it's given me a real appreciation for kind of intricacy of movement, timing, subtlety, get up and go, like, knowing when to kind of really fight for something and then knowing when to submit.
Yeah.
So it gives you a real intricate knowledge of your body.
Yeah.
And I think what's even more kind of impressive with that is it gives you a very intricate understanding of the way that your body interacts with forces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you're very quickly put, I'll say this kind of with a pinch of salt. I'd imagine that a lot of jiu-jitsu guys would actually be pretty good at understanding kind of classical mechanics.
Yeah.
The amount of exposure they get to just different types of different kind of directions of forces placed on their body, learning how to respond to them, knowing how much resistance to put into them. I think that, you get a really good understanding for the way that bodies move, but then also how forces pass through them.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really shaped the way that I kind of do my personal training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think you touched on a very good point. When you look at like biomechanics and jiu-jitsu, that I'd say jiu-jitsu is a lot closer to understanding mechanics, because it is essentially a system of levers with the joints and the moment arms and that kind of thing. Whereas you get some systems of martial arts where they talk about the mechanics of movement and the biomechanics, and the stuff that they're talking about it's physically impossible, or just doesn't make any sense. Like, no, look, guys, you kind of misunderstood the whole physics bit,
Yeah.
I think that's possibly why again, one of the general themes of martial arts is that if you get an average, and I'm not trying to crap on any styles here, I come from multiple styles myself, but I can, openly say that although I consider myself quite skilled in, say, karate, if I was to meet a jiu-jitsu player who is advanced in jiu-jitsu, in say everyday life, they take me to the floor, I'm screwed, because they have that better understanding of mechanics. And you get somebody, you see these videos all the time where it's like a kata champion or a forms champion who then take something like aikido, where there's really not that real application and absorbing force, and they take a jiu-jitsu guy, and 100 times out of 100 the jiu-jitsu guy comes out as the winner. And again, I just think it's that understanding of the forces, even though they may not talk about it in academic terms, they have that physical understanding of the person.
Yes, I think that's a really, really interesting point. Is I think there's a difference between understanding something viscerally and understanding something in intellectual terms. But yeah, like you're saying with the jiu-jitsu guys, that their understanding of how to tip balance, or how to change, how to manipulate somebody's kind of balance, and being able to kind of tip them enough just to be able to move them in the way that they want is really remarkable. But that was a really interesting point you mentioned about the kind of striking guys, the way that they talk about mechanics and stuff. That it's a very different style of kind of movement quality that they both chase, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think if you're doing a lot of striking, the movement pillars that you talk about, there's a lot of agility there. There's a lot of kind of coordination, speed, that sort of thing. And I think striking arts really do kind of bias towards some of those, flexibility. Of course, I know they all play into it, but the striking does really kind of favor a few of them, and I think the grappling kind of favors a few of the others. So grappling, you probably end up with a lot more kind of a strength demand, a bit more of potentially not so much kind of agility on the feet, but agility in terms of thought, in terms of the kind of the way that the person is kind of having to change the way that they're kind of thinking and responding. I think it's really interesting how different styles will bring out some of those movement pillars in different ways.
And like the grappling styles, they certainly require a lot more, I think. And again, my experience with grappling styles is limited, so people, if the audience are listening, don't get mad if I'm wrong, but the grappling styles certainly seem to require a lot more dexterity in the hands and the fingers when it comes to grips.
Yeah. It's a very different game to play. But we're seeing some of the fighters that come out now as good in striking as they are in wrestling, as they are in some of the ground stuff, and it's just like, it's terrifying. The amount of skill that they have in all of these different domains, it's just it hasn't been seen ever before. And I just think it's a really exciting time to be in martial arts and in sort of in sport in general. I think it's a very exciting industry to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of movement, obviously before guests come on, I do a bit of looking at the website, trying to understand a bit more about them. And I looked at your website, and it says that you offer movement coaching. Can you just explain a little bit more about what that entails?
Yes. So I kind of favor kind of teaching movement. I find that just really fascinating, more so than I kind of, I have a good understanding of nutrition, basic nutrition, basic, motivational behavior change, that sort of stuff. But I really honed in on the movement. I think that's probably kind of very biased from the martial arts. So probably that. So I've got a real passion for it, and I find it really interesting. Yeah. The coaching side of that, the movement coaching, is because I kind of want to bring the art of coaching in with those workshops as well. So I think it's all well and good enough to talk about the science of movement, what's actually going on, but that knowledge, I find it can often kind of it can die in the kind of hands of the person who understands it, because they're not able to communicate it. And so what I wanted to put together was a workshop that dives relatively deep into kind of movement, what's going on there, what we think is going on there, kind of my most up-to-date thinking, my most up-to-date understanding of movement, but then also blending it in with exploring different ways of coaching. So we explore kind of ways of teaching a bit more kind of linearly, a bit more kind of non-linearly. So we kind of play with the idea of linear and non-linear pedagogy. We talk a bit about kind of envelope of function, kind of load tolerance, that sort of thing. We talk about kind of 6 degrees of freedom. We talk a little bit about kind of classical mechanics and how that kind of, where that kind of shows up in the gym. So we kind of pull from lots of different disciplines and kind of get a brief but kind of shallow-ish understanding of movement as a whole. as best as I can kind of explain.
Yeah.
And then we play with how we can use that understanding in the way that we teach.
Yeah.
So it's a mixed bag. It's certainly not a system. It's certainly not a me saying this is it. This is the only thing you need to know about this. It's more of like, this is interesting. Here's why I think it's interesting, and here's, we can pull from this discipline, and kind of create a bit of a model of thinking for ourselves, and kind of adapt that in the way that we coach to our clients. So it's very, I try to make the kind of movement side of the kind of coaching side of it as contextual as possible. So I always want to kind of get people into the thinking of relating it to the client, relating it to the context, but then using some, scientific understanding of why we might use that sort of style of teaching in that way.
Yeah. No, it sounds great. It sounds very much like an MMA kind of approach to movement. You're kind of taking, it was like what Bruce Lee said, take what works, discard what doesn't.
Yes.
And I think, one of the issues I find in this industry is people have this dogmatic approach to movement, as in you must fit your anatomy and physiology to this movement template. It's like, well, no, you have to, it's the other way around. And so I think that approach that you're taking there, it's certainly going to make the experience better for people, because they're not having to fit this ideal shape of a movement, or this ideal system of movement. It certainly sounds like you give them a lot more freedom of choice and variability in what they do.
Very much so. We talk a little bit about kind of my basic understanding of a dynamical systems approach to movement as well. So we kind of take a bit of the kind of thinking from that and kind of try and employ that as best as we can. But I've been on the other side of the spectrum with this. I spent about $2,500 to fly over to the States to learn how to correct people's posture and to have them walking around perfectly and to have them standing perfectly. And I completely drunk the Kool-Aid, and I completely kind of got bought into this like very rigid system that says that everybody needs to be standing like this, everybody needs to be aligned like this, and I've done that. And I've gone through the kind of phases of trying to control every, single movement that, is going on in the weight room when I'm training, when I'm doing jiu-jitsu. I even got to the point where I was kind of just constantly analyzing and trying to control the way that I was walking.
Right.
So, really dive down that kind of rabbit hole of kind of motor control and trying to coordinate everything. But when I kind of came out the other side of it thinking that this is not sustainable. And, you can't control every part of your movement, and you can't walk in this perfect way that's going to kind of optimize flexibility and optimize kind of like ground reaction forces and the kind of way that you interact with them and the way that kind of your body's responding to, different changes in kind of the floor's gradient. And, I just don't think it's the way forward. But I think a lot of things, and this kind of, I imagine we'll get into this later, but this is kind of one of the things that I don't enjoy necessarily about the, parts or pockets of the fitness industry, is this very much kind of cookie cutter fits all, and kind of, saying that this system is the way that you must move like this because this is the way that is most functional and all this sort of stuff. So I've done that. And I just don't think it's the right way. So this is kind of my counter to that. So this is kind of me saying, look, I don't think that that's the way that, we should be teaching fitness. And here's an alternative model, but, from a place of here's what I think, what do you think?
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think it's good as well that we're starting to see a lot of pushback in the industry overall against those models of, you must be in neutral spine for all movements. You're not allowed to take the knees past the toes and all these kind of things, which, I think what they've done is the people who promote these methods, and I try not to crap on anybody in particular, but, we have to point to the people who promote these things and say, look, I think what you've done is you've taken studies into biomechanics of a movement which have pointed out potential risks and hazards with that movement, and you've just done broad strokes application to the to the entire movement spectrum. It's like, that is not how human movement works. But unfortunately,
I agree with you.
Yeah. But like you say, that's a rabbit hole we could go down.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Just one more point to kind of add on top of that is like, you've got great, your understanding of physics, biomechanics is, far, far beyond what I understand. But, even with my little understanding of it, I can appreciate that, force does matter. And that, posture does matter in certain circumstances. And, the way that you move does matter in certain contexts. But yes. I think that's really why we need to not necessarily just swing in the complete opposite direction of that. I think that we need to work kind of as collectively as an industry to kind of find that middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely. That balance at the end of the day.
Yeah. Otherwise, the other way and say that nothing matters, and that's just not true.
Yeah, because you mentioned posture, and I had this conversation in the last Minisode with Brad, who's a sports therapist, and one thing we get taught in sports therapy training is about postural assessment and correction, and there's kind of insistence that if a person is not in what you call anatomical zero, or the ideal anatomical posture, then they're automatically going to have these issues down the line. It's like, well, that's not true. And just because somebody has, say, a slightly elevated shoulder and protracted scapula, that then you have to fix it. It's like, well, no, look, why don't we look a bit more into the clinical history and the psychology, the whole biopsychosocial model, explore a little bit about this patient and why they have this default posture, in inverted commas. It may be that it's an emotional, physical guarding posture that's there for a reason, But we have, so that was one extreme, and the other extreme is you have people saying that posture doesn't matter at all. Which I think is just as bad as the dogma that we have to be in anatomical zero. But I think we're getting there slowly.
We are, and technology is really helping that. I think more conversations like these is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I guess that's part of that's why I kind of blend. That's why I want the movement and the coaching to kind of make that movement coaching workshop, is because I think the coaching and the understanding of the context is so key. Otherwise, all of this knowledge that we can get, it needs to be applied. Otherwise, we're just kind of studying the kind of fundamental kind of aspects of things, but without actually understanding that there's lots of different areas or lots of different dimensions of movement, as you spoke about, I think in your second podcast, that actually make up the context that we're talking about. And I think more things need to be considered. So hence the kind of coaching side of that.
Yeah, brilliant. So talking about coaching and training, obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people are transitioning to the online space, and you seem to be somebody who's really grasped a hold of that. Do you think that this is going to be the future of the fitness industry, or do you think people will want, like consumers and the public will want to go back to how things were before the pandemic?
I think it will. I do think that this will change the industry. And I think that's a good thing, because I use I'll use an example that's close to home, quite literally. Is my parents live on the top of a hill in the middle of nowhere and have no access to a gym.
Right.
So no access to trainers, no access to gym equipment, unless they were to drive an hour out.
Right.
And that's a problem, because what that means is unless they've got the kind of will to kind of go out and find the information for themselves and then employ that, it becomes very difficult for them to have access to information.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to have conversations like these, being able to talk, for me to chat to one of my clients out in Singapore or out in Australia or whatever it is really important, because it means that I can share my knowledge on a wider scale and as best as I can, and I can help more people. So I do think it will change, and I think that that's a good thing. But at the same time, nothing quite beats face-to-face contact. And I think one of the things that this kind of, this whole pandemic has really highlighted to me is that I really do miss face-to-face contact. I don't think that's going to be easily replicable online, via kind of webinar chats. It's very difficult to see the kind of intricacies of body language, of kind of check, the way that somebody is interpreting your information. You kind of get subtle readings on that. You can see the way that they're moving. And, right now I don't have in terms of training, I don't have a 360 view of you. So if I was to be watching you and seeing how you move, it'd be, somewhat limited to 2D. So there are limitations to it. But I do think that this will change the industry. I think it's probably just fast-tracked what was inevitable.
Yeah.
But I would love to see a blend of the both. So, I still want to be training people in person. I guess people that want to train with me that, don't have access to the gym that I'm working at, then I want them to still be able to have access to me. So,
yeah, brilliant. Kind of brings it back to that balance, doesn't it? Not going too far one way, not going too far the other way. Somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle is usually good.
Yeah. So there may be some fitness trainers out there who are looking to move into the online training space, but they don't know where to start. Do you have any tips or advice for them on where to start or potential challenges that they might face?
Yeah, I think if I was to make kind of one statement, it would be adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get into that in a sec. So when I kind of only transitioned into the online space, just before lockdown, before the UK lockdown, and it was a real steep learning curve for me. So, I'll do my best to kind of shortcut some of that learning curve now. So, number one, I would say, is become very familiar with different platforms. Because if the more kind of platforms that you're familiar with, the easier it is for your clients to, use whatever they're familiar with. And I think that's really important because we want to limit how many barriers to training that we can. Okay, so if my client is used to using Google Hangouts, then I need to be familiar with that. If my client is used to using Zoom, I need to be able to use that as well. So being kind of adaptable on different platforms is useful. Mm-hmm. I guess number two is we no longer have access to hands-on coaching. And some people use it, some people don't. I use it occasionally, but not too much. So I've really had to dial in on my kind of verbal cueing as and when necessary. So I think that's a skill that you're going to need to practice. I'd say number three is you're going to have to let some things slide. I think, if people aren't moving in the way that you'd really like them to, I think, it's okay to just let that slide sometimes, as long as they're not doing anything stupid and they're not kind of, juggling knives while standing on a Bosu ball. They're probably going to be all right. As long as you're not doing anything mad. So, let things slide. But I guess I'm kind of a bit biased because that kind of fits in with my training philosophy. So I think, let people just do the exercise. Don't try and be too controlling over what they're doing. I think that could be quite useful because particularly if they're not used to video calling technology, it can be quite stressful. And quite kind of a little bit different for them to kind of be doing this through a screen. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to have a good experience. And make sure that you've got a good internet spot in your house. Yeah. That should be number one. Make sure you've got a good internet spot in your house because it is an absolute disaster when the internet cuts out and when it's blurry. It's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for the client. So just make sure that you've got your internet sorted out because when it goes down, you realize how reliant on it you actually are.
Absolutely.
So, I guess 4 tips.
Yeah, 4 tips. That's great advice. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So I noticed on your website as well, you said that when you're at school, you could apply yourself more fully in physical education than you could. And the same was true for myself as well. I found that I was much better in that kind of physical play and learning through movement than I was in like diving into a textbook, at least until much later on. Do you think that maybe school children who struggle with the academic-based lessons should be offered more of a physical education-based format, so that would maybe have different ratios of books to activity for different kids?
Yeah, I was talking about this with one of my clients the other day, and we both kind of came to the conclusion that kids don't move enough. It's an odd thing, I think, to be kind of told to be quiet and sit down from the age of 4 until the 8. I just think that's a weird thing for kids. I don't think we're designed to just sit down and be quiet. I don't think we're kind of designed to just sit down and stare at a board. I don't think that's natural for a lot of people. I think kids need movement. Kids need to be able to make noise. Kids need to be able to have the freedom to explore their environment. It's how we get good at it. I do think we need more physical education in school. I made a couple of points on this because I just wanted to make sure there was a couple of bits that I mentioned. So bear with me. Yeah, so I think, we're not taught how to look after our body at school either.
Yeah.
We're taught to do sport, and if you don't like sport, you don't like physical education. That's what you come out learning, right? And that's such a shame, because, the human body is designed to move. It's what kind of makes us human. And I think if you don't enjoy physical education at school, it becomes very difficult to get into it later in life. So I think physical education needs to be taught in a way that's more palatable to everybody. And I think what is palatable to everybody is play when you're a kid. We play with objects, we pick them up, we kind of throw them, we see what happens when we bash them on things. And I think that's useful. And I think, fitness and movement doesn't need to be exercise. It just needs to be movement. And I think that it's stifled at a very young age. And I think it becomes very hard to unpick that later. So yes, I do think that kids should have the option to move more at school. But saying that, I think one of the problems that we've got is the kind of volume of children, or the kind of ratio from children to teachers. I think it's very difficult for 30 kids to want to be able to do their own thing. And the teacher still has, some targets and, some end of year grades to hit. And, they're trying to let 30 kids just kind of learn as they like. I think that would be nice ideally, but I think it's probably a more complex problem than I'm going to be able to solve in a couple of minutes, although I'd like to try.
Yeah, I think if you could solve that in a couple of minutes, you'd make an absolute fortune. But I think it's possibly why in recent years we've seen that explosion of parkour and free running. It's a fun activity anyway. But what I noticed, again, my experience with it's limited to what I see in videos, and it tends to be kind of adolescent to late teenage kids doing it. And it seems to, from the people that I've spoken to who do it as well, they have a similar tale to you and I, in that they struggled at school, and they kind of found parkour and free running as a physical outlet to expand their energy and learn more about themselves. And, that might explain the popularity of movement systems like parkour and free running, and now this ninja warrior stuff that's going on,
Yeah. I've tried to get into doing a bit of parkour myself. It's quite nervy. you've got to be like, it's a fun thing. But I think that's a really good point. Is, if you do struggle with sitting down and reading out of a textbook at school, I think the outlet that a lot of people do go for is some sort of sport, and that's certainly what I did, or some sort of activity. I would like to see more movement in school. How that happens, I don't know. I think a solution potentially is with, and I don't know. This is just me kind of talking about something that I really have no idea about. So forgive me for my unthought through answer. But I think with the kind of online world, expanding. Yeah, I think there's going to be different ways to test children on what they know and what they understand. And I think that over time, what my hope is that kids will be able to develop in ways that they want to, or they feel kind of drawn to, along with kind of learning what they actually do need to know for life, being able to read, do maths, that sort of thing. Yeah. But I do hope that at some point there's a more kind of personalized way of kind of testing. I think one of the things that could be kind of difficult with that is it becomes difficult to kind of place a kind of hierarchy then on it. Yeah. And so that becomes difficult. And then, but I don't think it's probably not very easy to make lots of money in parkour, or to make lots of money in doing kind of yoga, and unless you teach it maybe, or unless you actually go to the kind of top end of it and you do, teach sport. So it's difficult because, a lot of the jobs out there that we have today are kind of very academically kind of, we're geared towards kind of academic jobs through a lot of schools, or kind of vocational jobs, but not ones that encourage movement. So, if school is there partly to help us get jobs and to help us make money, then it becomes very difficult if you just spend your whole time moving, and you don't want to teach it, or you don't want to kind of go into sport. it becomes difficult, because then you haven't got the grades that you need to go to university, that, you know, to get the degree that you need to get to the job that you need. So it's I don't know, it's a very complex thing, but short answer, yeah, I do think kids need to move more.
Yeah, cool. So we talked a lot about kids and movement, so let's just talk about adults and movement for a second. So we know that if a kid is physically active when they're younger, they generally tend to have good movement and lifestyle habits when they're adults. But there may be some people listening or watching who are adults now and they never had any kind of movement experience or movement training discipline as a child, and they're looking to get into that. Is there any advice you give to members of the audience like that, who are currently struggling to set good movement habits in their adult life?
Don't try and eat the whole cake in one go. You know, just take the little slice that you feel like you can do today, and just eat that small tiny bit of cake, and then just, you know, as your stomach expands and gets kind of more, you know, bigger for movement, and as your tolerance to eating fitness cake goes up, then, you know, you can eat more. I think there's this kind of idea that in order for you to do exercise, you need to go and do like a hard 30-minute workout. You need to be sweating, you need to be sore, and you need to be out of breath. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think in order to move more that you need to go and, you know, bust yourself in a workout. I think if you haven't lunged for the last 20 years, or if you haven't done a squat for the last 20 years, do one today, then do one tomorrow, then next week do 2 every day, then the next week do 3 every day. And I think what you'll probably find is that you start to actually enjoy the fact that you've set yourself a task and you've completed it. And I think then you can start to actually, you know, develop a bit of an enjoyment to it, and then the rest is easy. I think you've got to associate a positive emotion with that, and until you find that, it's going to become difficult for you to start. So if you like maths, think of it as a maths problem. You know, if you're going to do 7 lunges this week, you're going to break them down into 1 every day. 1 times 7, you've done 7 lunges. Next time you're gonna do 7 to the power of 2. So you're going to do 7 times 7. So then, you know, every day you do 7. On Monday you do 7. Whatever. Think of it as a maths problem. You know, and if you like a narrative, if you like stories, that sort of thing, make a story out of it. I don't know. Every time you go to the cooker, you have to imagine that an arrow is flying over your head, and you have to duck, and you have to go into I don't know, just whatever it is, whatever you like, attach movement to it somehow. And if you don't know what you like, then movement might be it. But start off small. I think if you try and do everything in one go, you're either going to just completely break yourself, or you're probably just going to confirm in your own head that you don't enjoy it because it's painful. That's the approach. Fine.
I like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sounds like there's a potential program in there, algebraic fitness, you know, math problem.
I like that.
That's probably how we're going to solve the kids not moving enough, mixing maths with the fitness, you know.
You know, that would work. That would work.
Absolutely.
You know, I think some of the best conversations I have with my clients is when they're working out, when they're doing something. And I learn well when I'm working out. I learn well when I'm doing something physical. I don't know why. I'm sure there's some sort of science behind it. But I think there's something to be kind of said there. I think, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be done in a workout form, but I think, you know, doing something actively whilst having, you know, some sort of conversation is a good way to learn as well. So I'm sure that they could, you know.
Oh, good. No, good answers. So on to the hot topic question. What are some of the trends in the fitness industry that you don't like, or which you think should be changed?
Okay.
Where to
start? This kind of thesis versus antithesis without an attempt at, you know, a synthesis. I think there's a lot of people who say this is the way to do it. Then another person says, no, that's wrong. This is the way to do it. But there's rarely an attempt to find where both people are right and where both people are wrong. And so there's not enough kind of synthesizing of knowledge. And I think it becomes difficult because it kills conversation, because you then feel afraid to put your opinion out because you don't want to be knocked down because if you get knocked down a peg, then you lose respect and you lose your credibility. And then because you lose your credibility, nobody wants to train with you and you don't get paid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can't make a living. So it's a very kind of it's a difficult. I think it can be a difficult industry to have conversation in, because if I'm very open to being wrong, if I'm having a conversation, I'll hold my hands up and say, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's totally fine. But I think if I don't do that, then I kind of get into this thing of like, oh, you're wrong, I'm right. And we end up kind of having a clash. And, I really don't enjoy that about the industry.
Yeah.
I like good conversation with people to put their brains together and try and come up with a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's far more useful than just kind of butting heads. And I think there's too much of that in the industry.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it touches on a point that kind of irks me a little bit, is when people say that they're science-based, which really means that they have something that they believe in, like a principle or a technique, and then they go to the literature and they find material which supports their bias, and they say, look, I'm science-based. It's like, no, look, science doesn't mean you go to the literature and get what supports your belief system. It's a way of thinking. And something that I do, and which I kind of try to advocate for other people to do as well, is every month I go and see if there's any new research which challenges what I believe in and my long-held beliefs. So static stretching, for example, is always a big one. On a monthly basis, I'm always seeing, is there any new systematic reviews? Is there any new RCTs which are saying, actually, static stretching isn't that great. It isn't, what people have made it out to be. I think that's certainly a habit that a lot more people should develop if they want to claim to be science-based. Actively try to challenge your own beliefs.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Dan, because I've fallen into that trap, and I've fallen into that trap of buying into one system, investing a lot of money into it, investing a lot of time, and more importantly, investing kind of my identity as a trainer into a method.
Yeah. And
it's difficult, because when you realize that there is no gold at the end of the rainbow with that method, then you have to take a long time to backtrack. And it's really, really hard to take a good look at your thinking and to question that, what's the word? Is it epistemology? Something like that. It's really difficult. So I think the earlier you can set that attitude towards learning as, everything that you outlined there, the better, because you'll spend less time chasing one rabbit when you realize that you need to be chasing the other one. Or, I think the earlier you can adopt that idea of being, neutral and just kind of, observing information and letting it sit with you without attaching yourself to it, the better. Yeah. I think that's a really good way to approach science and to approach training.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if somebody isn't using science to challenge their own beliefs or to explore other alternative viewpoints and perspectives, they're not science-based. You said something which brought something to my mind, and I've completely lost what it was.
Something about investing lots of money into courses, maybe, or no,
it's gone.
Fine.
Maybe a future podcast. I'll probably watch this back. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the point. Okay, onto the fun question. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take one book, one piece of gym equipment, and one type of food or drink, what would they be?
Okay, I have a boring answer. So first, I think the book would be a survival guide. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not allowed that one, then I'd probably go for Mythos by Stephen Fry. I think if I'm going to be spending a lot of time on my own, I'm going to need something to occupy my mind. So I think some sort of interesting narrative could be useful. Yeah. So I think I'd go for something like that. I was tempted to kind of say something a bit more kind of academic, but I thought I should probably entertain myself rather than try and learn stuff, because I'm not going to be able to have a conversation with anybody about it. So if I'm stuck in the desert, I think the piece of equipment that I would choose would be a spear. I think that would be quite fun. I think I'd target practice, see how far I can throw it. I think that could be a bit of fun. I'll be able to run around a lot, so if I can run and throw things, I'll probably be all right. I'll probably be able to, if I find an oasis, I'll be able to climb some trees. And then with the food, I'd probably go for some sort of grilled salmon. sweet potato kind of wedges type thing and some salad. So
yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me an idea.
Go primal. I'll spear myself some fish and entertain myself with stories.
Yeah, I like that. Great answer. Before we finish, can you just tell the audience where they can find you and how to get in touch with you?
Yes. So my Instagram handle is probably where I'm most active. So my Instagram handle is Move with Monty, and my website is www.movewithmonty.uk. That's not .co.uk. It's just .uk. Yeah, I couldn't find .co.uk. So if anyone wants to find it, if anyone who wants to find it and buy it, let me know because I'll buy it off you.
I'll put those up in the caption as well. I've just remembered what it was that you gave me a thought before with your answer, and you were saying how people invest a lot of time and money in a certain brand or identity, and then they spend a lot of time backtracking. I think a lot of people are put off by that, by the kind of the mental anguish that they feel, or the cognitive dissonance, if you want to use it's hard. The term, yeah. But people shouldn't think of that as losing. They should think of that as growth and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was young, up until about the age of 7, I went to a school called a Montessori school, and there they encourage you to learn through play. And they want you to, you have something that you want to learn, but you find a way to learn it yourself. I think that's really, really useful in the way that we can kind of learn with fitness education, with any kind of education. Is I think it's really useful to actually go into a system to really understand it from their perspective, from the perspective that they're talking about, but then also have the ability to separate yourself from it. Because if you understand something viscerally, if you understand one side of the conversation really well, then you can understand both sides of the conversation very well. Unless somebody's really well read of something, I don't really trust their opinion until I know that they've actually done it.
Yeah.
If somebody tells me that this is black, then I want to be able to kind of play with it and know. So when I know it's black and I understand that point of view, then fine. Then after that we can debate it. So I do think it's useful to go into a system, and I think that if you can really go in there and take what's useful and kind of sift those gold nuggets out of the dust, that's great. I think if you've done that and you've invested your time into that, fantastic, absolutely well done to you. But now you've got more work to do, because you've then got to figure out why that system is not correct. And once you have both sides, then you can apply whatever you need from either side of that argument to many different people, and you can become a much more contextual trainer, as opposed to just read off of a guide and employ. So
absolutely, yeah, that's a great point to finish on. Monty, honestly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, mate. Always
thank you.
Talking to you, mate. All right, take it easy, fella.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.